Good morning. Thanks so much for coming, all of you. What a great turnout. So welcome to the Black and White building. And I'm going to speak this morning about the architecture and some of the kind of background to our approach to architecture and our approach to this building. So this is us. Can everybody see the screen all right? It's like I feel, because there's plenty of empty seats at the front. So this is us. We're Waugh Thistleton Architects. We're a practice base just around the corner. I've been in Shoreditch for about 20 years, a long time. And for the last 20 years, we've become increasingly fascinated, passionate, excited, interested, obsessed even with building in timber, as you can see. And we're a purpose-driven practice. So the reason for the existence of our practice is a direct purpose, and that purpose is to think about the implications, to understand the implications of the construction industry on our planet, on the climate emergency, to think about what we do as architects, what we produce, what we draw, what we envisage, where our ambition is in terms of how that relates to the climate emergency. So every decision that we make in the practice is made through that lens. And we're pretty open about that as well. And this is a conversation which has been going on for some time. This is not a new thing that's just dropped into our laps. This is a conversation that's been going on for some time. And in the 1970s, so I understand, the conversation was really about operational carbon. So that's about the carbon that we use to heat and to cool and to light our buildings. And did somebody just put, oh yeah, he did. He didn't pour it out. So the operational carbon, we got pretty good at saving that operational carbon with double glazing and with insulation and with all those kind of things. And actually now, our building regulations are pretty good for air tightness, for insulation, for double glazing. And our operational carbon, the amount of carbon it takes to heat and light the building, cool the building, has gone right down. And by the 2000s was a much smaller element of the carbon burden of construction, of the carbon burden of a building over its lifespan. And that's over a typical 60-year lifespan. 50 years in Europe, so I understand anyway, I guess it's imperial. So, and then we got, in the 2000s, we really started thinking about on-site energy generation. So solar panels on the roof, the odd windmill, maybe some geothermal, that kind of thing. And again, as our grid has decarbonized, as we've got better at that kind of thing and better understanding really, where it's appropriate, when's the right time to do it, we've got pretty good at that. And now in the 2020s, we find ourselves really with the operational carbon being a relatively small part of what we're looking at in terms of the carbon burden of a building over its lifespan. But actually, as you can see, the construction part of that's got bigger since the 70s. It's got bigger because of all that insulation and the double glazing and everything else. And now in the 2020s, that's become more than 50%. For a 10-story residential building, multifamily residential building, it's about 60% of the building's carbon burden are the materials and the construction process of building that building. But all of our regulation, all of our planning law, all of the things that we talk about, that we award through LEED and BREEAM and all those other things, all of those things are focused right down here on this little yellow line. So what we had been looking at as a practice and thinking about as a practice for some time is about how we can begin to reduce this burden, how we can begin to think about the buildings that we need to build and how we can reduce the amount of carbon that we use to do that. And for us, we built our first CLT building, the first one in the UK, in 2003. Then we built another couple of small ones, a house extension, little private family house. It's just gone on sale, actually, funnily enough. And then, at the same time, bubbling away in the back of our heads was this notion that this could be a material, this could be a viable alternative to concrete and steel. This could be a structural system that we could use for high-density buildings, high-density housing in our cities. And in 2007, when we were building the Olympics, and not we, but our industry was building the Olympics, and there was and the price of steel and the price of concrete rocketed, our clients began to look for alternative methods of construction, different ways of building things. And so we were able to successfully suggest to our client at the time that we look at building this out of timber. And so we drew two buildings. We drew a concrete and steel building, and we drew a timber building. And we were able to demonstrate that the timber tower, timber 9-story building, was less expensive and faster than building in concrete. And so in 2008, after 11 months on site, including demolition, we built this 9-story CLT residential building. And it was fantastic. It was super fun. It flew up 27 days. 4 people built the entire building in 27 days. The structure is everything is structural, so that it's like a big honeycomb. So the internal walls, the external walls, the floor slabs, the lift shaft, the staircase, everything working together. And you can see here the CLT it's pretty primitive. It's like the same depth of CLT on the floors as it is on the walls. We use these galvanized shelf brackets to screw the whole building together. So it's a 75 mil galvanized shelf bracket and 120 mil screws, all through the building. So 4 people running around with cordless screwdrivers. And no site waste, because it's all prefabricated, so no skips to site. Very quiet. In fact, you can see we built this building about 9 meters away from the nearest residential home, and no complaints during the whole process of construction. And far fewer deliveries because everything is prefabricated, just plus or minus a few millimeters that arrives on site, so an 80% reduction in construction traffic. And very lightweight because the structure weighs about 20% of a concrete and steel structure. The entire building weighs less than a third of a concrete building. So we're able to vastly reduce the foundation for that building as well. And it's still there. So we still talk to the residents. And in fact, the head of Canadian Forests was there just last year, and he phoned us up and said that he wanted to come and see the building. And his secretary had a secretary, which was just how important he was. And so and I was a little bit late. And when I got there, he told me that he'd been looking up at the building, and an elderly lady had come up behind him and poked him in the calf with a walking stick. And when he turned around, she pointed up at the building and she said, "It's all made of wood." And then walked off. Oh, no, this one. So this is what I'm talking about today. So this is the black and white building. Welcome to the black and white building, which was completed just before Christmas for the office group. This building is a 5,000 square meter gross internal building designed for co-working space. And the entire building from the ground floor slab up is made of timber. So it's a timber frame, timber floor slabs, timber core, timber external party walls, timber curtain walling, and then timber solar shading on the outside of the building. So 4 different types of engineered timber. You can see the frame here. The beams and the columns are made from LVL. And LVL is a laminate veneer lumber, so that's like plywood. So if you imagine if you plank a tree for the CLT, which you have up here, so this is made of planks glued together. When you make a veneer, you put a tree trunk on a spiralizer, on a massive spiralizer. You spin the tree trunk at great speed, and out comes the veneer. And so you get, 100 plus meters of 3 millimeter veneer. Then you slice that up, and you stack it up with adhesives, and then you put it in a press. And this is made from beech trees in Central Europe, from near Frankfurt. And it's 2.9 times stronger than concrete in compression. So the beams and the columns that you see have an inherent fire protection. So we're below 18 meters as a building. So the 60 minutes that we get fire protection from the beams and the columns, that's actually within the charring of the beams and the columns themselves. So what you see in the building is completely what you get. So the kind of the tectonic, if you like, how it's all put together is completely evident to you when you see the building. And then we have CLT, cross-laminated timber, floor slabs. And as I'm sure you all know, CLT is made from secondary grade planks from the outside of a tree, outside of a European spruce tree generally. And those planks are laid out, they're sprayed with a PVA adhesive, which is like a sort of a water-based kind of like Copydex kind of plasticky adhesive, sprayed with that adhesive, and the next layer come on top, perpendicular, and you build up in odd layers. And these are a 5-ply panel, and they're about 140 millimeters deep, although that varies depending on the span. And in this building, we have spans of between 6 meters and 9 meters across the building. And I'm probably going to come on to this in a sec. There you go. So the way in which the building works, when you design a concrete building, the thing about a concrete building that you're always thinking about when you're designing it is, how am I going to hold it up? Because it's really heavy, and it's all about that kind of massive structure that you're holding up. Now, a timber building, as I've said, is 20% of the weight, the structure 20% of the weight. So you're not really worrying as much about how you hold it up, as much as you're worrying about how much the wind is affecting it, how much the shear forces, the racking of the building is happening. So what we're always thinking about is generating a structure which is as lightweight as possible, but which is compensating for those horizontal forces. So what we've done in this building is, if you look at the edge here of the slab and where it is on the beam, the slab doesn't sit on the beam, the slab sits within the frame of the beam. So if you imagine you have this open skeleton of this lightweight structure here, and that you place the floor slabs within the skeleton to lock that skeleton tight. Does that make sense? Good, okay, getting nods. So, and then where the core is placed also is part of that resistance, so making sure that the core ties back into all those floor slabs. And by doing that, by really designing from the inside out, by making the engineering core to the design principles of the architecture, we're then able to vastly reduce the amount of timber that we use. So we use about 40% less timber per square meter than we used on our first office building. So we're always looking at ways in which we can reduce the amount of timber that we use in the building. And that's both from a cost perspective, but also just reducing the amount of materials that we use in general. So the buildings that we build, the buildings that we design, as I think you can see from this building, are quite simple buildings. They're buildings which aren't ostentatious, which don't look at, excessive kind of or exuberant massing or form or use of materials or triple height spaces or anything. They're quite calm buildings. They're buildings that understand the engineering principles behind the materials that we use, and they're buildings that recognize, I think that they recognize their impact, that they understand that this is a new age. So for us, it's not just about a material, not just about reducing carbon, but also thinking about a kind of a cultural shift, if you like, in the way in which we approach the materials that we use, the things that we use in life. Anyway, that's a drawing of it. So you can see really simple, and all the steel connections that tie the beams and the columns together, all those steel connections are buried within the timber itself. So the timber acts as fireproofing for all those connection details. And you can see we've also got sprinklers in the ceiling here. The sprinklers, this is a misting sprinkler system, and those are not for the timber, they're for the windows, because we're very close to our neighbors, as you can see. So we're so close that we would have needed fireproof glazing. So it's more efficient to have sprinklers than it was to have fireproof glazing. So here you can see the timber being delivered, and where you arrived on the pavement outside, that's where the trucks pulled up. So the trucks pulled up there, and the timber was lifted out by crane, 872 pieces of timber in the building, each one of which had a QR code on or a barcode on. That barcode read off and understood exactly where that piece of timber was going to be placed on site. So a very precise process, quite, I don't want to say slow, but kind of, exact process. So you get this kind of different culture in the process of the construction, which is one that's about care and attention and precision and placement. There's no kind of banging or there's no dust, there's no grinders or jackhammers or it's a very different process. So you can see each one of the beams here being lifted carefully into place. So everything is prefabricated, as I've said before it comes to site, because after you've left here, you can kind of go and knock one of the columns with your with your knuckle, but do it gently because they're really tough. You can see that actually, working into these beams and columns, working into the CLT is something that needs to be done in the factory beforehand. So everything is designed completely as with a digital twin. So the whole building is designed fully before it arrives on site. And yet, because it's timber, you have that opportunity for adaptability as well. So this is the building site here. You can see the truck will just arrive at the front here. The crane, where the light well is over there, is taking the pieces, stacking them up here, and then lifting them over to the back of the site and building up the core. So the core was our site access staircase. So the stairs that you go up and down now, the timber staircase that you go up and down now, at Christmas, just before Christmas, that was a site staircase with contractors running up and down there with scaffold poles and everything else. So you can see here the frame going up and the floor slabs fitting within that frame. And this is the curtain walling. So the curtain walling comes from Sweden and is made from offcuts from glulam manufacture. So you can see all short section glulam. So it's kind of a byproduct, really, of glulam production. So just talking about the plan, so you can see on the ground floor here, we have the common areas, the shared areas here, and this is the large reception area with the staircase at the front, and then offices at the back. That can be, so this is part of the leasing, offices at the back here. And then on a typical floor, one of the things which is, I think, really successful about the plan is that when you come out of the lifts, you come out of the lifts into the kitchen. So you have a kind of constant sort of social kind of interaction in the building. And the other thing as well is that you have this opportunity to walk around and around the core. So you have this kind of, you can tell I'm a walker. So it's what's the perambulatory? Need to practice that word. One of the other things as well, and I know that for lots of people, talking about timber buildings, insurance has become an increasingly difficult issue. So one of the things that we do as a practice is to engage, excuse me, is to engage with our client's insurance broker very early on during the design process. And in this situation, we talk to the brokers in stage 2, talking to a number of different brokers, a number of different underwriters, and realize that actually their main concerns are not fire as much as water, so long-term water ingress. What will happen to the building if there are leaking taps, flooded bathrooms, broken pipes, that kind of thing. And there's, I think, a notion amongst the insurers that the bathroom will flood, the floor will go rotten, it will collapse, and the building will fall down on top of it. So we have to kind of dispel these rumors, take them through the design process, and really, I think, reassure them that we're competent, reassure them that there's a competent design team who know what they're doing, who've done this before, who are taking really careful care and attention to the building, to the design of the building, and the construction process. And that's understandable because this is a new way of building. This isn't simply taking the concrete and steel out of the scenario and replacing it with timber. This is a completely different way of building. To do these buildings successfully, from the design process, from thinking about the architecture in terms of the engineering from the inside out, thinking of the building as a series of components which are then assembled on site. That way of thinking, to the process of construction, to thinking about fire, to thinking about water ingress, all those issues mean that this is mean that we need to approach these buildings in a different way. And to do that, to satisfy the insurance industry, I think we need to demonstrate competence as an industry. We need to demonstrate that we are, that we have the right fire engineers, that we have, the right structural engineers, the right architects even. So what we did in the toilets here, in the bathrooms stack all the way down the core. So we took out the CLT floor slabs in the bathrooms and we replaced them with joists and plywood. And the insurers are like, oh yeah, joists and plywood, that's on our list. That's okay, can do that. And you know what? We'll never put CLT in a toilet floor again. Because you don't need to. It's expensive. And much cheaper to put, much more efficient to put plywood and joists in the toilet floors. So there you see the whole kind of core where you walk around. You've nearly always got daylight at the end of every route, at the end of every walk. So, and then when you come out of the lifts, you have this kitchen in front of you as well. So the core doesn't become something that's hidden, doesn't become something that's in the corner or, or as a dead space. It becomes a kind of active part of the building. And what we understand from the people working downstairs is that people catch the lift up, but they always walk down the stairs. And there's the kitchen. So I usually do usually show these slides, not in the building. So, and this is Sophie, who couldn't have done the building without, who's the client's architect. So opening windows, completely timber staircase. A lot of the benefits that we're beginning to understand about a timber building are not only the carbon benefits and the construction process benefits, but also the health and well-being of being in a building like this. So there's now clear data from Europe which says that, if you are sick in a timber hospital, you get better quicker. If you're educated in timber school, your concentration levels are better, you better productivity for school children, etc. And that when you work in a timber building, you tend to work longer hours, you stay with that employer for longer, you're more satisfied in your job. And when you sleep in a timber building, you're supposed to sleep for longer. I sleep in a timber building, I'm not sure about that. And you can see, so the other thing that we have here is opening windows throughout the building, so mixed mode. 5 minutes. Okay, I'll speed up. So we've got mixed mode here, so opening windows throughout the building, and as much exposed timber as we were able to have throughout the building. And you can see here, this is the downstairs, which you've been to, typical office space, which you're within. So just say something quickly about the solar shading on the outside of the building. We put a model of the building into a sun path diagram, like this, into a solar model. We heat mapped the outside facade of the building, and then on that heat map, we modeled the solar gain into the building. So to maximize the winter solar gain and minimize the solar gain in the summer, the solar shading that you can see on the outside of the building, which runs vertically on the north, west, and the west, and horizontally on the south, allows us to have almost completely clear glazing. So the glazing that we use doesn't have any E-coating on it. It has a slight tint, but that allows us, I think, to have this much more kind of domestic atmosphere within the building. So because you've got this clear glazing, I think you get a better response to the material itself, you get a better response to the timber, and you get a much kind of calmer and more sort of friendly domestic interior to the building as well. The other thing, of course, is that if you don't put an E-coating on glass, then you can recycle it. And as soon as you put an E-coating onto glass, then it's landfill. So all those buildings that you can see that way, that's all landfill. Depressing, isn't it? So the tulip wood that we use on the outside of the building is an American hardwood. It goes through a thermal modification process, which is basically you boil it in sugar beet juice for about 3 days. And that gives it amazing longevity, so about 50, 60 years of lifespan. And we also impregnate it with a fire retardant as well. So that's a hardwood from the United States. The reason why we use that timber is because, quite sadly, it has a really small root bowl as a tree. And it used to grow all over America. And since the climate has begun to change, especially in the United States where wind speeds have picked up, they've all blown over. There's warehouses full of this beautiful, strong hardwood across the United States, and they're making cardboard out of it and pallets out of it. So we've been working with the US Department of Agriculture for some time, thinking about how we can use this timber in different ways. So you can see that across the building. I think we have about 8 different depths and frequencies of solar shading across the building in order to maximize that solar gain in the winter, minimize in the summer. And there's our roof deck there in the summer, something to look forward to. There, that's the CGI of the building for planning. So that's always kind of like fun to see what it looked like at planning stage and what it looks like now. So in terms of our carbon, just quickly, and this is something that we do through the whole process of design in our practice, is to look at the carbon. Oh my goodness, look, all the cameras coming out. Is to assess the carbon as we're going through the building. So you can see that the RIBA and LETI, their targets for office buildings, I think 600 kilos A1 to A5, and we're at 410 for this building. And in fact, without the basement, we'd be, that figure isn't here, but without the basement, I think we're about 270 kilos. So the basement represents about 41% of our whole life carbon. And you can see just the substructure here. And that's the number of tree seeds that it took to grow the trees that built our first tall building. Thank you.